Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Jamie. I watched 25 years of marriage dissolve in a single evening because my wife convinced herself that passion mattered more than partnership. I met Anastasia when we were both in our 20s, college students at the University of Wisconsin. We dated through our senior year, got engaged right after graduation, and married a year later in a small ceremony with family and close friends. We were full of hope about the future we'd build together. That future unfolded exactly as we'd planned. I started working for a regional accounting firm. Anastasia became an elementary school administrator. We bought a modest house in a suburb. Had our first child when we were 26. Our son came along 2 years later. For the next 2 decades, we were consumed by the chaos of raising children. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Had enough for what we needed and some of what we wanted. I advanced steadily in my career, eventually making partner at the firm. Anastasia loved her work with the school district, became an assistant principal at her elementary school. Our marriage wasn't passionate in some Hollywood sense. Over the years, as we focused on our kids, things between us has gotten cold. We had unresolved disagreements that lasted for days. Even our physical intimacy eroded over time because the demands of parenthood and careers took their toll. When our daughter graduated from high school and went to college, 2 years later, our son followed. Suddenly, the house that had been filled with noise and activity and constant demands went quiet. Every parent experiences this empty nest phase. Anastasia and I had known it was coming and thought we were prepared. But the absence of the kids exposed how far my wife and I have drifted apart. I adapted relatively easily, enjoyed the peace, started reading more when I am not working. But my wife, Anastasia, struggled with the transition. She'd thrown herself into motherhood completely for over 2 decades. Her identity had been wrapped up in being mom, attending every school event, coordinating activities, being the center of our family's daily operations. With the kids gone, she felt adrift. Would make comments about how quiet the house was, how routine our life had become. Would say she felt like she was just going through motions, without purpose or excitement. I tried to be understanding. Suggested we travel more now that we have the freedom. Take up new hobbies together. Enjoy this phase as a chance to reconnect as a couple rather than just as parents. She'd agree, but the restlessness remained visible. Some deep dissatisfaction I couldn't quite identify or address. About a year after our son left for college, I noticed Anastasia began to follow Instagram accounts and podcasts about relationships. I would see her watch discussions about open relationships, polyamory, and swinging. Content that suggested long-term couples needed to explore and experiment to maintain passion. Her consumption of thoughts like this made me uncomfortable, but I didn't say anything. Anastasia was an adult, capable of consuming whatever content interested her. I couldn't police what she read or listened to. Assumed she was just going through some phase of questioning, exploring ideas without any intention of acting on them. I even remembered when we had dinner with another couple we'd met at a community social event. They have been married for 30 years without any children. Anastasia asked how they made it work. The man commented about how they were getting more adventurous. He framed it as keeping things spicy and staying young. By the end of the night, I would find out that this couple was in an open marriage. I stayed mostly quiet, just listening, not contributing to that particular thread of discussion. Later that night at home, Anastasia brought it up again. Said it was interesting how many people their age were exploring those kinds of arrangements. That it wasn't as unusual or taboo as it used to be. She adds that some couples found it actually strengthened their marriages by removing the constraints and pressures of strict monogamy. I told her directly that it wasn't for us. That we'd had 25 good years of marriage built on commitment and fidelity. That I had no interest in risking what we'd built for some experiment in modern relationship theory. She seemed to drop the topic. Said she was just making conversation, not suggesting anything. We went to bed, and I assumed that was the end of it. But over the following months, I noticed other changes. Anastasia had always had a close group of friends. Women she'd worked with, socialized with, and maintained relationships with outside of work. But recently she'd become particularly close with one friend I'd met only a few times. A woman about Anastasia's age who'd never married, lived alone, and seemed to embrace a more unconventional lifestyle. Anastasia started spending a lot of time with her. She would mention going to women's social meetups, book clubs, or wellness groups with this friend. She would come home late from these events, sometimes not until 10 or 11 at night. Anastasia's appearance changed, too. She started dressing differently in clothing I wouldn't have expected her to buy. More attention to makeup and hair. Not inappropriate exactly, just different from how she'd dressed throughout our marriage. Gradually, she seemed emotionally distant. Our conversations became more surface level, and she became half present even when we were in the same room. I tried addressing it. I asked if everything was okay and if there was something we needed to talk about. She'd brush me off, say she was fine, just adjusting to this new phase of life, exploring interests outside of being a mom. So I backed off. Told myself she needed space to figure out who she was now that motherhood wasn't her primary identity. That this was a normal transition period and we'd find our rhythm again. Then one Thursday evening, Anastasia told me about a weekend retreat. She said she'd been invited to a private couples retreat and described it as a wellness weekend focused on relationship enrichment and reconnection. Expensive, but supposedly worthwhile. Run by relationship coaches who specialize in helping long-term couples reignite their connection. She seemed eager to go. Said it would be good for us, a chance to focus on our marriage without the distractions of daily life. I was skeptical because I wasn't sure we needed a retreat with relationship coaches. But Anastasia rarely asked for things like this and seemed genuinely excited about the possibility. I didn't want to be the reluctant husband who refused to invest in the marriage. So I agreed, booked the weekend off work, packed a bag, tried to approach it with an open mind. We drove out on a Friday afternoon. Anastasia was cheerful during the drive, more animated than she'd been in months. The location was a large private estate outside a small town. Nice property, well maintained. Several buildings spread across wooded grounds. Some cars were already parked when we arrived, and other couples were checking in. Something felt off immediately. The atmosphere was too casual, too familiar among people who presumably didn't know each other. The way the staff greeted arrivals with knowing smiles. The abundance of alcohol being served despite it supposedly being a wellness retreat. Anastasia checked us in while I brought our bags. We were directed to a room in one of the guest buildings. As we walked across the property, I noticed the other couples. They were dressed casually. The energy felt more like a party than a retreat. We got to our room. Anastasia immediately started getting ready, changing clothes, and freshening her makeup. I asked what the evening schedule was. She said just a casual mixer where we'd meet the other couples and the facilitators. The mixer was held in the main building, a large open space with sofas and chairs arranged in conversational clusters. Music playing, dimmed lighting, bar set up along one wall. About 20 other couples were there. Ages ranging from 30s to 60s. Everyone is drinking, laughing, and mingling. Anastasia immediately gravitated toward a group near the bar. I followed, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the vibe. As I listened to conversations around me, pieces started clicking into place. People weren't talking about relationship enrichment or emotional connection. They were making sexual jokes and discussing sexual experiences. This wasn't a couple's wellness retreat. This was a swingers event. The realization hit me like cold water. Looked around the room, seeing it clearly now. The flirtation between couples who just met, the knowing looks, the whole atmosphere designed around sexual openness. I grabbed Anastasia's arm and pulled her aside. Kept my voice low, but couldn't hide the shock and anger. Told her we were leaving immediately. That this wasn't what she described. And I had no interest in being at this kind of event. She tried to downplay it, said we were already here, that I should just relax and keep an open mind, that it was just a social thing, that we didn't have to participate in anything we weren't comfortable with. I told her I was extremely uncomfortable and wanted to leave. She refused. Said she'd been looking forward to this, that I was being uptight and closed-minded, that all she wanted was to see what it was like, to experience something different from our routine. We argued in low voices in a corner while the party continued around us. I made it clear I was leaving with or without her, and our marriage would be over if she didn't leave with me. She told me to go ahead and leave then because she was staying. That moment was when I knew the marriage was over, not because of what the event was, but when faced with a choice between respecting my boundaries and pursuing whatever she thought she'd find here, she chose the latter. I walked out, got in our car, and drove home alone. 25 years of marriage. 2 children raised together. A life built on mutual commitment and trust. And she'd thrown me into this situation without honest disclosure, then chosen to stay when I made clear I wanted no part of it. The disrespect and betrayal were absolute. I got home around midnight, went to our bedroom, and just sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. I couldn't sleep. I sat there processing what I should do next. Anastasia came home on Sunday morning around 11. Walked in like nothing had happened. Started to tell me about things that happened when I left, and the interesting people she'd met. I stopped her, told her simply and clearly that the marriage was over. She laughed, thought I was being dramatic, said I was overreacting, that nothing had even happened, that it was just a social event. I explained that what happened or didn't happen physically was irrelevant. She'd lied about what the weekend was, had put us in a situation she knew I'd be uncomfortable with. Then, when I wanted to leave, she'd chosen to stay rather than go with her husband. That choice told me everything about where her priorities were, and they weren't a part of our marriage. She tried to argue, said I was being too sensitive, that I didn't understand, that she just wanted to feel alive again. I told her I understood perfectly, that she'd made her choice, that I was done. I moved into the guest room that night, started sleeping there, eating meals separately, existing in the same house, but in completely separate realities. The next 2 weeks were cold silence. Anastasia seemed to think I'd calm down and we'd move past it, that this was just a fight we'd eventually resolve. Then I served her with divorce papers. I had consulted with an attorney the week after the retreat incident, explained the situation, filed for divorce on the grounds of irretrievable breakdown of the marriage. Wisconsin is a no-fault divorce state, so I didn't need to prove anything beyond that the marriage was broken beyond repair. When Anastasia received the papers, her demeanor completely changed. She thought I was bluffing, that I was hurt but would eventually forgive her. That 25 years of marriage were too much to throw away. Now faced with actual legal dissolution, she panicked. She started begging and promised she'd never do anything like that again. I listened to all of it without being moved. The woman making these promises was the same woman who'd lied to me, disrespected me, and chosen a party with strangers over her husband's comfort and dignity. Apologies didn't change what she'd done and didn't restore what she'd broken. Our kids found out about the divorce within a few weeks. I'd called them both, explained simply that their mother and I were separating, that it was my decision based on something that had happened, but I wouldn't discuss details. Anastasia apparently told them more, or they got the story from her through conversations I wasn't part of. Both kids were furious with her. Our daughter especially called me upset, said she couldn't believe her mother would destroy our family like that, said she'd always looked up to our marriage as an example of what commitment looked like, and now she felt like it had all been a lie. I tried to be measured in my responses, didn't want to poison their relationship with their mother. Told them this was between Anastasia and me, that they needed to maintain their own relationships with her regardless of what had happened in our marriage. But I couldn't hide that I was the one who'd been wronged, and they knew me well enough to understand I wouldn't have filed for divorce without serious cause. The divorce process took several months. Wisconsin law requires a waiting period. We had to divide assets accumulated over 25 years. Everything is split as required by state law. The house would be sold and the proceeds divided. No spousal support since we'd both been working throughout the marriage and had similar earning capacity. The first few months after moving out were strange. I focused on work and started seeing a therapist to process everything. Anastasia, according to mutual friends and occasional updates from the kids, seemed to embrace her newfound freedom initially. Going out frequently, posted on social media about rediscovering herself and living authentically. The divorce was finalized about 9 months after I'd filed. 25 years of marriage ended with a judge's signature on legal documents. I felt relief more than sadness. Relief that it was official, that I could move forward completely rather than existing in legal limbo. Several more months passed. I'd been divorced for nearly a year. I was settled into my apartment, into my routines. Then one evening, about 16 months after the divorce, there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find Anastasia standing there. She asked if she could come in, said she needed to talk to me. I hesitated. I wasn't sure I wanted to have whatever conversation she was seeking, but curiosity, or perhaps old instinct, made me step aside and let her in. She came into my small living room and started talking, saying she'd made the worst mistake of her life, that she'd thrown away the only person who truly loved her, that things she thought were freedom had actually been crushing loneliness in disguise. She told me about the past year, how she'd initially enjoyed the independence, the ability to do whatever she wanted, but how hollow it had all felt after a while. How the friends who'd encouraged her exploration of alternative lifestyles never spoke about the consequences of such a life. Said she'd started therapy recently and was working on understanding why she'd acted the way she did. She had gained insight into her crisis around identity after the kids left, her irrational belief that excitement and novelty could fill the emptiness she'd been feeling. She admitted she'd been wrong, that our marriage had been good, that I'd been a good husband, that she'd destroyed something valuable because she'd convinced herself she needed something more. She begged for forgiveness, asked if there was any possibility of reconciliation, said she understood she'd have to earn back trust, but she wanted to try, that she couldn't imagine the rest of her life without me in it. I listened to all of it sitting in my armchair while she stood near the door, crying. When she finished, I told her the truth as gently as I could. I'd forgiven her months ago, not because she'd earned it, but because holding onto anger was poisonous. Forgiveness was something I'd done for my own peace, not for her benefit. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. Didn't mean I could unsee what she'd chosen that night at the retreat. Didn't mean I could forget the months of lies and emotional distance that had preceded it. She'd made a choice, had chosen novelty over commitment, had valued some abstract idea of feeling alive over the concrete reality of our 25-year partnership. And that choice had broken something that couldn't be repaired. Not because I was unwilling to try, but because the foundation we'd built had been destroyed. You can't rebuild a house on rubble. I told her I wished her peace, and genuinely hoped she'd find whatever she was looking for in therapy, that she'd build a life that felt fulfilling. But that life wouldn't include me. Not as a partner, not as a possibility, not even as a close friend. We needed to move forward separately. Let each other go completely, so we can both heal. She cried harder, begged one more time, said she understood, but couldn't accept it. I didn't argue or engage further, just waited quietly until she collected herself and left. When she did, I closed the door behind her and stood in my quiet apartment, feeling sad but certain. I haven't heard from Anastasia since that evening. My daughter, who kept in communication with her, tells me she seems to have accepted the finality of the divorce. Looking back now, I understand what happened more clearly than I did in the moment. Anastasia's crisis wasn't really about our marriage. It was about her own identity collapse when her role as mother ended, about aging and mortality, and the fear that her best years were behind her. Those are real struggles, understandable struggles. Many people face them during the empty nest transition. But her response to those struggles, lying to me, pursuing experiences that violated the fundamental agreement of our marriage, choosing strangers at a party over her husband's dignity, that was a choice she made. A choice I couldn't excuse or overlook. 25 years of loyalty ended in one night of curiosity. Not because that one night was so terrible in isolation, but because it revealed that Anastasia had stopped valuing what we'd built, had convinced herself that passion and excitement mattered more than partnership and commitment. Some mistakes don't destroy love. I still had love for Anastasia, for who she'd been, for the mother she'd been to our children, for the 20-plus years when our marriage had been good. But love alone isn't enough to sustain a marriage when respect and trust are gone. You can forgive someone completely and still recognize that the relationship can't continue. Can wish someone well while maintaining firm boundaries. Can acknowledge that something was good for a long time while accepting that it's over now. That's what I learned through this experience. Anastasia threw away 25 years for a fantasy about feeling alive that turned out to be empty and lonely. I let her go without bitterness because holding on would have been worse than losing her. And I built a new life that's smaller but more authentic than what we had at the end. Some people might think I should have tried harder, gone to counseling with her, worked through her crisis, given her another chance after she'd had time to reflect. But I know myself, know that I could never have looked at her again without remembering that night, without wondering what had happened after I left, without questioning every late evening or every friend's name I didn't recognize. The marriage ended the moment she chose to stay at that retreat. Everything after was just paperwork. And I'm at peace with that. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the other person is to simply let go of what's already been lost. Anastasia wanted to feel alive. She's alive now, free to pursue whatever she thinks will fill the emptiness. And I'm alive too. Free from the weight of a marriage held together only by history and obligation. We each got what we needed, even if it wasn't what we wanted. And that's enough.